the issue wasn't on my radar when I started 5 years ago, and I'll tell you how it came up for me. I was having a conversation with Representative Kathleen Peters in Tallahassee in August of 2015, and she was talking to me about her interest in the mental health issues as it relates to our state prison system, and really educating me. And so she said, why don't we go to a couple of places together? Because there's this unique law that allows any legislator to show up unannounced and walk in. So she and I agreed to do that. We did that in September of 15, did a women's prison in the morning. In the afternoon we did an adult male prison, but it also happens to be the place where they house youthful offenders, male youthful offenders. And we both left there not feeling really good about what we saw and heard. And so it was a couple of weeks after that I read an article in the Miami Herald about an alleged incident that had occurred in a youthful offender camp in the north of Florida. And as a former forensic auditor, I just didn't believe it could be possible that something like that would be happening in this state or this country. So I decided to take it on as a little audit project. And so I used all those skill sets that I have acquired over the years as a forensic auditor, and I thought about an audit plan on how I would accomplish finding the truth. And so I went to a couple of work release facilities so I could look at those facilities, but really went there for the purpose of trying to find inmates who had served time at that particular prison, and getting their stories. And so before I ever went to that prison, I had talked to a number of people who had served time there, and through those stories had pieced together how this alleged incident could occur, and sadly confirmed that not only did this type of incident occur, but others like it. And so by the time I went there, I was briefed up, did my work, took all my results to the secretary, sat down with her and told her that really she had a facility that was not well suited for this particular population, and I gave her all my reasons. And she came back about 6 weeks later and said, you know what, you're right. And I'm going to close that prison as you've asked me to. And in doing that work, I got a lot of stories about the place where Kathleen Peters and I started. So, and learned that it was sadly a place where officers were beating these kids that were there. These are the kids that are direct file that are 14 to 17 years old. So then, having accomplished something with my first goal, I decided to continue the work. And I just kept coming upon things that were sadly troublesome to me, and so I decided to use my skill sets to try to make change. And so I continued that work, and I've continued to make change. Many of the things I've worked on have been reported. Some things have not, because I've got things under investigation and I don't want to interfere with that. But I've spent about 800 hours now in the last 2 years, and probably been on about 100 visits that average about 3 to 4 hours each. And I'm glad I've been able to make some change there. Decriminalizing marijuana, looking at any issues where there are crimes where there are no victims. I think we ought to look at alternatives, and obviously drugs is one thing that we need to look at. Some of the guidelines and the provisions that have been put in place have proved to not be very good, and not really to make our society any safer. If you look at what some of the countries in Scandinavia are doing, it's really quite remarkable. I mean, they're closing their prisons because they're actually rehabilitating people. Sadly, we're not doing a lot of rehabilitation in our prisons. That obviously the budget's bigger than a state budget and so forth, but there are still many things that can be changed. As I mentioned earlier about constituent services, most people don't really focus on the fact that a large part of a state legislator's job and a congressperson is fulfilling daily responsibilities of taking care of constituent needs, and that's a big part of the job. You know, when someone's not getting their Social Security check, and you've got to figure out what's the problem, and when someone's not returning their phone call to even talk about it, that's a big part of the job. But the other issues that I want to work on, that where I think that I can make a difference, is related to healthcare. Healthcare is going to continue to be a big issue. I've been on the healthcare appropriations in the state of Florida for 5 years now. A lot of the money comes from the federal government, so those are the same issues that we'll be talking about in Congress in Washington, D.C. Immigration obviously is a big issue here in South Florida, and I'm very interested in that topic as well. And I think that there are ways to be effective. You know, it's funny, because when I went to Tallahassee 5 years ago, people said, "Oh, you're just a Democrat. You can't make a difference in Tallahassee." But I have made a difference. I've made a difference in the work that I've done in prison reform. I've made a difference in securing funds for my community back here in the budget. And so I know that I can be just as effective in Washington, D.C., because I'll use all those same skill sets that I'm using in Tallahassee to reach across the aisle, to work with people, and to get things. It's a great question, and it's a fair question. I think that I have very clearly demonstrated in Tallahassee that I know how to get stuff done, even in a partisan environment. Think about the fact that in Tallahassee, 2/3 of the legislature is Republican, and I'm in a minority, but I've still been able to get things done because I know how to work with people. You know, in my consulting firm, I represented, first of all, as an auditor. You know, when you're going into audit, you're not really a welcome person, right, in the environment, because you're looking for something. And then as a consultant, trying to help my client when maybe they have violated the terms of their contract, and I'm trying to get the best result for them and to try to get to the truth. I'm very used to being in a room where there are other people that want something very different from what I want. And so I'm not uncomfortable in that environment. You know, some people don't want to be in that situation where they're in conflict with somebody else. But that doesn't bother me. I've done that my whole career. And that's exactly what I've been doing in Tallahassee. I'm in a room with people that have very different positions from what I have. But I have found ways to meet them on the issues where we can agree upon, and in building relationships, move them closer to my positions where they're able to move. On day one of my campaign, I have called for a single-payer system, Medicare for all. I do think that we will get there in this country. It's not going to be an overnight journey, but I think that should be our goal, and I support that position. I do believe that we'll probably move in steps to get there, but I think that's where we need to be. Yes, I mean, we have got to do a lot more work in this country on gun violence prevention, and that means assault weapons. That means these bump stocks. I filed a bill this year to ban bump stocks, which, you know, before Las Vegas, we didn't even know what a bump stock was, right? So, but I filed a bill to make it illegal to purchase or to even possess a bump stock in the state of Florida. Traditional public schools and I got a great education in a traditional public school when I was growing up. What I'm seeing right now is a systematic demantling, if you will, of the public school system, and a shifting of resources towards privatization. You know? And it's very similar to what I have seen in these private prison operators, you know, where money is shifted in greater proportion to the privatization, to the profit-making institutions. But I do not believe that we should be making profits on the backs of school children. I just don't believe that. And I don't support charter schools in the way that they are structured right now in the state of Florida. And I'll be very vocal on that. Say that I understand their position, I respect their position, and then I'm going to explain the funding, the numbers in terms of how money is being shifted from public to privatization. I mean, just the issue alone with constructing a school, you may not know this, and most people don't, but let's say that in a marriage, you decide you want to run a charter school. You can have your wife build the actual building, and then you can run a 501c3 charitable organization, a charter school, and you can rent the building from your wife. And there's not even a law in the state of Florida that says that the rent that you pay your wife for that building has to be at fair market value. You can pay her anything that the two of you have worked out, but that's a related party transaction. And by the way, when you go away and your school closes and the building is paid for at taxpayer expense, then you own that building privately. And that's a real problem that I have with charter schools. And that's, by the way, not all charter schools, but that is one abuse that I have seen in the charter school system.
So you want to reform it? You wouldn't necessarily want to get rid of all charter schools?
It would have to be such significant reform that we would not call them charter schools anymore. It would be called something else. It's certainly going to be remarkable, just as it was 5 years ago when I won in August of 2012 and became the first openly gay person to ever win a seat in the Florida legislature in the history of the state of Florida. So it'll have that same tone, if you will, of history. But in terms of the work that I do, you know, I said when I went to Tallahassee 5 years ago that I was going to be a legislator who happens to be gay, and not just a gay legislator. And you know, I work on lots of issues, but I am very interested in LGBT rights, and I have been a voice for our community in Tallahassee, and I've actually gotten things done for the community in Tallahassee, which perhaps would not have gotten done if I weren't there speaking up on it. You know, I've got the first pro-LGBT bill ever passed out of a committee, ever. I got the first line item in the budget that was to support an LGBT initiative. So sitting at the table and being a full participant does make a difference. And I think in Washington it'll be the same way. I mean, and it's not just Florida, by the way. There is not an openly gay congressman anywhere in the South. So if you go, you know, all the way from Texas all the way up to Washington, D.C., and until you get to Rhode Island, you're not going to find an openly gay congressman.
Just the district.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the same way here in Florida. You know, I got elected to represent District 113 here in Miami and Miami Beach. But the truth is that I have come to represent the entire LGBT community in the state of Florida. And I get calls from people all over the state asking me about issues or asking me to be an advocate on issues. And I think the same thing will happen in Congress, that I'll be a national voice on LGBT rights.